Please welcome Dr. Ochberg. Welcome.
Thank you for, I'm going to need a little help with a flash drive from somebody. Do we have visual aids? And let me tell you, the only thing harder than being the speaker after lunch is being the listener after lunch. You've digested, your blood is dealing with your meal, it's not up in the brain, and you haven't had a chance to stand up and shake a little bit. So please do that right now. Stand up, wiggle around for a few seconds. Come on, even you, even us old guys, stand up. That's good. Shake a bit. And maybe look around. I think, okay. So, this flash drive, we're beginning, I want Cleveland morning. I know this isn't Cleveland. I know it isn't the mornings. But when we get that, we'll, and I don't have anything up here, so I will just ask you to push a button. Part of the introduction of me that wasn't mentioned, which I realize is quite relevant, is that 30 and 40 years ago, I was a political actor in the federal government and in the American Psychiatric Association. Those were times in the 60s and in the 70s when we had different types of turmoil and prejudices and antipathies. One of my jobs was being the chair of the Council on National Affairs of the American Psychiatric Association. And the interesting thing about that council is it served as the umbrella for the Committee on Black Psychiatry and the Committee on Hispanic Psychiatry and the Committee on Women and the Committee on Native American Psychiatry and Psychiatrists. And it was during that time that I was approached by one of my professors from Stanford who said, I am gay. I didn't know this. And remember, this is back in the late 60s, early 70s, and said it's time that we had a committee on gay, lesbian, and bisexual psychiatrists, task force. And as the director of the level above this, first thing I thought was, how would this be received by the ethnic minority constituencies in psychiatry and by the Committee on Women? And I went to them, and thank goodness the response was, by all means, we understand what it is like to have been disparaged and unrecognized and to have common concerns, and it's time that we did this. Now, I have not been with the American Psychiatric for a while. I do not know if there is an equivalent task force or committee on Muslim American psychiatry. There might be in some of the other professional mental health organizations, but part of what we're doing here is getting to know one another, getting to know our histories, our resources, our connections, and if any of you afterward are interested in whatever I could contribute to what you're doing to organize a constituency in mental health in this country and to pay appropriate attention to the people, to the concerns. Hey, thank you very much. That might be something that we find is useful. That was in the professional organization. I rose up through the ranks to be the #2 psychiatrist in the federal government. And along the way, we developed a minority center at the National Institute of Mental Health. And along the way, there were very interesting leaders. There were Cobbs and Greer wrote a book on Black Rage, and it was important to know that some of the psychodynamics of the way important feelings at that time were developed, expressed, and sometimes not expressed in different minority groups were worth investigation, elucidation, and I thank my colleague who said, think about becoming journalists as well. We learn we're in an academic environment right now. And some of us spend a little too much time thinking and interacting within the ivory tower. If there is a desire to change prejudices and neglects and animosities nationally, a lot of that happens through communication that doesn't have footnotes, communication that doesn't have the same reference. We need both. But actually, it's for that reason that for the last decade of my life, I have become the psychiatrist who deals with journalists. I know no other psychiatrist who has as a major occupation relating with journalists. And I've been doing this. I've raised about $10 million for journalists who are interested in understanding trauma and who will come to scientific meetings to understand the medical and interpersonal aspect of being exposed to more than stress, traumatic stress. And now I find that these journalists are also first responders, and they have a good deal of traumatic stress, including post-traumatic stress disorder. So that may be something that some of you in this room are also interested in pursuing with me. I am a clinical professor. I am a former cabinet officer of this state. I'm part of the team that defined post-traumatic stress disorder, but I don't deal much with academia and I don't deal much with psychiatry. I do deal with journalists because it's so important that they understand what I'm going to hopefully teach and brief you about right now. This is an opportunity for me, and I think it's an opportunity for you, whatever your role is in your concern about the Muslim community and the mental health of the Muslim individuals and collective in our country. Post-traumatic stress disorder existed as long as we had people. It was not actually discovered, it was defined. And we had committees that came together to define this. I think I was a significant member of that movement because of American history that I lived through. By the way, before I take this slide off, Coping with Cruelty, that's my title. Cruelty. There's trauma beyond cruelty. But the trauma of cruelty is the worst. Because the trauma of cruelty means it was perpetrated. And there is some body or some policy that actually enjoys inflicting pain on others or is indifferent to the pain of others. That's the definition of cruelty. Enjoying hurting or being indifferent to the hurt. And isn't that part of what brings us together? At times it's outrage. How could they do this? And at times it's despair. Will it ever stop? And I want to lead you into understanding the science, the biological science of the human mind and spirit exposed to cruelty, exposed to trauma. So, next slide. You're going to have to press for me. Do I have something here? Is this it?
You have to.
This is it? Oh, and is it this? Somebody come up here and coach. I take instruction well. You know, why isn't it working? Joe, my friend, I'm going to call
I know, I might have
you
to
push
push the
buttons. Oh, you did it. That's it. Well, 1968. I was a resident at Stanford. I was halfway through my psychiatric residency after being a medical student at Johns Hopkins and an undergraduate in history and literature of England at Harvard. And first, Martin Luther King was killed. And then Bobby Kennedy was killed. And if you're of my age, the memory of President Jack Kennedy being killed never leaves you. And so it was one after another, and we were shaken. We were stunned. I got a telephone call from an assistant professor who said, "Frank, can we do something?" I was one of the active and aggressive ones in the residency program. He was on the junior faculty. And we had an older professor whose name was Eric Lindemann, who was analyzed by Freud, and he was emeritus from Harvard. And I remember as we started to organize, he said, "You're denying your grief." Well, we did, in a way, deny our grief by organizing. And we brought things together. And, just a little more about the time. I mean, if any of you ever are in Memphis, that's from the Civil Rights Museum, and you go through it and you end up actually standing there. But that was the day that Martin Luther King's closest inner circle were pointing across the expanse to where the sniper had shot and killed Martin Luther King. And that's the scene in the kitchen area of the hotel where Robert Kennedy was shot by Sirhan Sirhan. And this is part of what was going on then. It was tech. It was the worst part of the Vietnam War. It was a piece of American history. It was also part of Woodstock. 1968 was a strange and wonderful and terrible year. It was part of rioting, and some of the riots, the Watts riots, the Detroit riots of that era, certainly had a cast to it that separated along racial lines and polarized and created myths and strong feelings. Well, there was us. That's me a good long time ago with a few colleagues. We wrote a book. The book was called Violence and the Struggle for Existence. We looked at violence biologically, psychologically, psychodynamically. Nobody wanted to write the chapter on gun control, so my wife and I ended up, she was a ghostwriter. I wrote the chapter. We knew that America had traditions and policies that caused us to have a gun death rate that was 70 times that of Japan, 60 times that of England. I think El Salvador was the only other country that had a gun death rate close to ours. And the availability of guns is part of our history of violence. We wanted to understand it. A note to those of you who are young and who are here to maybe be inspired to be active. This is the first real academic work that I did. I was the editor of a book, I wrote a chapter, and the president's advisor came and visited with me and these others because there was a national commission, a national inquiry into causes of violence in America. And just a group of faculty and we essentially were students. We did the groundwork, and their exhaustive 22-volume, presidentially funded and overseen that commission on violence in America took a page from us. So part of what that did for me was it told me, you get an idea, you pull something together, you do it, it can make a difference. It can stimulate other things. Our book was published by Little Brown and Company, not a shabby publishing house, and it's been read. In fact, something really heartwarming happened. I have friends who were familiar with the poet Maya Angelou, and they wanted to visit with her, and she read that book that we wrote. She read it because Coretta Scott King wrote a little introduction. So she welcomed me to her house. I had an audience with an inspiring African-American poet woman of letters, probably the smartest person I've ever met. One thing leads to another, and that was an uplifting part of my life and part of connections. Well, there was another era between this formative part in my life, 1968, and getting up to 1980, when we formulated the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder. We went through the Vietnam era, we went through the era of active feminism. Gloria Steinem has agreed to be the host of a fundraiser for, in my name, for the work we're doing with journalists. So I'll be with her next month. I helped as after I was head of the Council of National Affairs, I became the male member of the Committee on Women of the American Psychiatric Association, which is a high honor. And I recognized that the suffering of women who experience incest and battering and rape is essentially the same syndrome as the suffering of soldiers who experience battle fatigue and shell shock, and a form of alienation because of the stigma. And so the women's movement and the Vietnam era together brought us up to the 80s and brought us to the time when we could clarify this diagnosis. I was also involved in debriefing and expert witness work for some of our hostages who were held in Iran. And I don't want to make too much out of that, but it's ironic that Ahmadinejad was one of the hostage takers and hostage holders, and he is the president of Iran right now. And his personality and his politics helps with the polarization that we suffer and that we want to heal. As the baton was passed from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, we defined PTSD. So now I want to go into this part. And some of you know this, and some of you don't. But you're hearing it from me, and I'd like you to understand the way I think of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is the impact of an event that scares you, it horrifies you, it renders you feeling helpless at the time. It is not something that is terribly sad, like the expected death of your wife or husband, unless that death happened in a sudden and a grotesque way, unless that death had images so that you can't escape the images of your dead loved one. But when it's all about the loss and the grief and the sighing and the mourning and the longing, that's something else. It doesn't mean that these other things that we didn't call post-traumatic stress disorder are trivial, far from it. But to get your hands around what post-traumatic stress is all about, it's all about, first of all, being exposed to something that was truly traumatic. And I'll show you the definitions of what is truly traumatic in a minute. And then you have three coexisting, but separate and distinct and different changes. There are changes in the way your brain works. There are changes in the way your body feels. There are changes in the sense of who you are. I love this anecdote about the old man who comes to the doctor. And he says, "Doctor, my bowels aren't moving. Doctor, my head hurts. Doctor, I have pains in the knees and the ankles. And doctor, to tell you, I myself don't feel so good." So there is something that we consider ourself, and we sometimes take it for granted. diagnosis. But when you have all of this traumatic psychological and biological reaction, you yourself doesn't feel so good, and you yourself doesn't perhaps know who you yourself really is. But here's what we meant by each part. First, instead of having autobiographical, regular memory, test your memory. What did you have for breakfast yesterday? Just think about it. Some of us at my age don't know. But as you struggle to remember what you had for breakfast, your memory is working. That's your regular memory. If you try to think back to a holiday, Thanksgiving, this past year, the one before, you're using your memory. It works like a computer. It functions. A trauma memory is different. It's generated from a different part of the brain. It comes at you when you don't want it to. It comes with a lot of feeling. And it may come in a way that is broken up. Something is bleeding out of its outlines. It may be an accurate memory, it may be a distorted memory. When it's a nightmare, it's hitting you at night, and the brain does things to attach what happened during the day to what happened in the past, and nightmare imagery, traumatic imagery at night eventually wanders away from the reality of what happened. But it's scary, and you don't enjoy going to sleep. A flashback is a form of trauma memory, and a flashback is different from an unwanted traumatic memory because the flashback feels like it's now. Flashbacks often have hallucinations. They're not hallucinations completely from your imagination, but a woman smells the aftershave of her rapist. A soldier smells the cordite of the battlefield. It's not there at the time, but the olfactory sense dials it up. And it feels like now. So it's scary, and it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous if you mistake. Then, when you had to fight for your life, or if you are armed and a former military person, when you had to kill in that situation, there you are back there again. So that's what's meant by a trauma memory. We ended up with a list of 5 different ways that a trauma memory could come at you, and any one of those 5 ways suffices to meet the standard for this in PTSD. Now, just last year, Apostolos Georgopoulos, a fantastic Greek-born American neuroscientist in Minneapolis, using a $2 million old machine for a new purpose, a magnetoencephalogram that is like an EEG that measures brain waves, very subtle brainwave changes, finds in 95% of a group of known PTSD veterans, something registers, and it appears to originate in the right temporal lobe, right ear. What is going on? Well, when a neurosurgeon Penfield stimulated that part of a brain during neurosurgery decades ago, what came out were memories, vivid, sharp memories in his patient who was being operated on. My field has not yet accepted this. There are some of us who are very taken by this. There are some who are still skeptical. The work needs a lot of development and replication. But I tell you, I think a few years down the road, we're going to be saying that PTSD, and particularly this part of PTSD, the trauma memory, is like epilepsy. It's like because you've been exposed to something that overpowered your senses and that took your brain beyond what it had encountered before, you have what amounts to an irritable focus in your right temporal lobe, and on its own, just like in epilepsy, it dials up your memory when you don't want it to be dialed up. That's, to me, that's breathtaking. And here I was part of a group that by committee decided we would put this in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And 30 years later, we're starting to have the neurological evidence that this may indeed be real. There have been a lot of brain scans to correlate with PTSD, but they don't really correlate with the flashback, the nightmare, the unwanted memory. They just say, well, you've got a brain that's very nervous. Well, you've got a brain that's somewhat numb. And anybody who's very nervous has a brain that looks like the MRI studies of PTSD. But this is getting more specific. What's the meaning of this, by the way, as we go through it for our real topic today, for Muslim American concerns? Well, I think there's real meaning because you could have a son or a daughter, you could have someone who's traumatized. You can read the literature of just how many relatives over there are exposed to very real, significant trauma and tragedy and horror. It's never expected when it's you. There could be suicide bombing that takes place, and it's in the newspapers, but when it's you. So, it's good to have a concept. It's good to know that this isn't the same thing as people who use terms like going crazy. We shouldn't use those terms. We should be respectful of schizophrenia, manic depressive disorder, of the neurological disorders that progress. But this is, I believe this is a medical disorder that has a good explanation, and it has approaches that are useful too. So that's the first part of PTSD, the trauma memory instead of normal memory. Now the second part of PTSD is sadder. It's being numb. It's being avoidant. I was part of the team that was funded by Congress, $11 million back in the 80s, to look at our veterans after Vietnam. And I examined all of the veterans in Michigan who were part of the scientifically designed sample. And what broke my heart was not the flashback. It was the guy who says, Doc, I know I love my daughter, but I don't feel it the way I should. And because he doesn't feel it the way he should, he avoids her when he should be there with open arms. Now, the numbing and the avoidance that is part of this syndrome is in direct opposition to what is most needed, which is to join the embrace of the healing human group. Stigma, shame gets in the way, but for my guys who are Marines coming back from Afghanistan or who are women who were abused, it's that they are smart enough to know that their feelings are not all there. And they isolate themselves because of it. Now, there's some common sense responses. If you have a friend who's numb, I'm looking at the young folks here. I don't know if they're really with me. Which is good, because sometimes you want to joke during something serious, and it's good to avoid being pulled in a little too far. But think about it at those tables. I see young faces. You may have friends who you think are disrespecting you, or don't like you. And what's really going on? If it's this kind of a circumstance, It's that they're feeling numb, and they don't have the full range of feeling that it takes to be connected person to person. I just want to lay that out there because I think we can do a lot to welcome people who are numb back into the group and to encourage them and to give them a sense that it takes time. You don't have to have it all back at once. The last part of PTSD, which is the most noticeable part, is being jumpy. You can't sleep. You can't concentrate. You're on the lookout for danger. You're easily startled. And what's tough, if you're living with someone with this syndrome, is they frequently get angry. Their fuse is shorter. And I'm taking care of some veterans now who are homicidal. And I thought this through. One of them might actually kill somebody. And I'll get sued when it happens. But if I were to report that they have homicidal fantasies, they'd send the person to a psychiatrist, like me. So what do you do? Well, those of us who are in this work, we just do the best we can. I'm trying to get my guy who I have great admiration for. He was wounded as a Marine. His dad is a high-ranking police officer. He's at school. He will become a police officer. I want his fantasy to be arresting someone and doing it by the book and putting them in prison rather than killing them. But right now, killing is part of what goes through his mind as he falls asleep. And I think it makes sense coming back from Iraq, where the rules of engagement involved killing before being killed, and frankly, it involved killing civilians. Tough job. We're talking in the abstract and at the policy level of doing the work of taming our warriors and trying to tame our whole country so that it doesn't feel that there's an endless war on terror and we're always on a war footing. We're trying to change that. Well, as a psychiatrist, I did try to do it one person at a time. And maybe that's the best all of us in this room can do. Face up to that and think in our own creative ways of what to do. Well, if you have, I'll run through the definition very quickly. In the beginning, the very first definition of what a traumatic event was something beyond the range of usual human experience that would be markedly distressing to almost anyone such as. Then we found out it's not beyond the range of usual human experience. If you live long enough, you will be traumatized. So then we try to find another way of defining it, and this is what we came up with. You can witness something, you can see that paragraph, and at the time that it happened, horror, great fear, or helplessness. For those of you who are mental health professionals, there's a new definition coming down the pike, and really this definition is coming from the researchers. They want to be a little bit more precise. It's not different. It's really no different. Well, what do we do to help? What is the treatment all about? First of all, if you're my patient and I'm your doctor, I'm really no different from you. What happened to you could happen to me. It would happen to me if I lived through some intense trauma. PTSD doesn't affect everybody, but certain kinds of traumas affect almost everybody, like being raped at gunpoint. But if you're in a car crash and someone in your car is killed, the odds that you would get PTSD from that are less than 50%. And there are other exposures where the incidence of PTSD varies. The average amount of PTSD at any time in America, 10% women, 5% men. The treatment approach that I use involves, in the beginning, some discussion of this. Let's be sure that the person who is feeling this way understands we have a diagnosis. I I remember in 1983, I opened up what was then DSM-3 Green Book. I was working at St. Lawrence Hospital. She was a frail African-American woman who had been raped in South Lansing. And we went through the book, and she said, I don't believe it. That's me in that book. And therapy started then. And it was relieving for her to see it has a name. Doctors know what it looks like. Because you feel awfully alone and awfully scared before you know what it is. I think just holistic health is a terribly important part of recovery. Eating well, sleeping well, getting exercise. I end up becoming something of an athletic coach. Finding out what fits. When's the last time you did? Some people actually go to the gym and some take walks. But you have to get that going. Humor is terribly important. And I remember one guy who was traumatized. He was a teacher. And things were going wild in the classroom. And he lost his sense of humor. And he found himself shaking some of the students. Well, I asked him what he found funny. And he liked David Letterman. But Letterman was on at the Late Late Show. And tape recorders were just coming out. And we decided he could tape his show and watch it during the week, and it might help restore his sense of humor. Doesn't mean that as the therapist or as the friend you try to make somebody laugh, but you try to find out what they have to say about their own sense of humor and what it takes to get it back. Better than Prozac, sense of humor. Spirituality is very important. And nowadays, I'll admit, I am not religious in the conventional religious way. I don't go to temple or church. But I have tremendous respect for the belief of people who are believers and for the healing capacity of a congregation. At times, my top strategy as a therapist was to find out why a patient was not going to church. Someone who had gone to church and who found it extremely helpful. In one case, the victim of the cooler bandit in South Lansing was poor and she didn't have anything to wear. And Maya Angelou had said, Frank, there are some black atheists in America. I know two. She said, if you want to know me or you want to know people from my community, you have to know about their church. Well, I had an African-American patient who wasn't going to church. And it was a silly thing. She was embarrassed about not having what to wear. She was quite obese, and she was poor. And we found a place that could get her what she needed, and she got back, and I think that did a lot more good for her than I was able to do. So that's something for this Muslim mental health network to think about. And to think about ways that those of us who are more medically and scientifically oriented can collaborate with those who are spiritual leaders and who are the first line of approach for people who are traumatized, victimized, marginalized. We have to have an ongoing constructive dialogue. There are other specific methods. By the way, our friends from NAMI have a wonderful booklet in the back of the room about PTSD. I just looked through it. Absolutely accurate. So take a page from NAMI and you'll find it there. I use something called the counting method. It's an invention of mine. It's as good as EMDR or any of the other devices. Essentially what I do is count out loud to 100 while my patient thinks through, relives their trauma without talking. I figured that's about as long as I could stand root canal. I don't want anyone to have more than 100 seconds of reliving the worst time of their life. And they do it without talking. Because that's the way it happens to them at home. Or on the bus, out of the blue. but they have the mastery of turning it on, and by 100, it's over. Then I write furiously as they tell me what they just remembered. Then I read it back to them. And you know, it may not take more than once doing that to radically diminish the power that the trauma memory has over that person. So that's a specific approach. I find that a lot of my patients have low self-esteem for one reason or another. Often it's because they are very good people and they blame themselves for what went wrong. And they blame themselves in the voice of one of their childhood gods, mother, father, grandmother, somebody who is in the chair of their board of directors. For those of you who are psychoanalytic, the board of directors is the superego. It's pretty well established by age 5. The members and the voices that we hear, which are really our own voice, shift a little as we grow up. This is not the ego. This is the group that judges us and tells us you've been a good girl, good bad girl, good boy. You could be 70 years old and you have something going on. Oh my God, I've been a bad boy. So I try to get my patients to visualize their board of directors who's on it. Now come on, let's get your grandmother in one of those chairs in the back of the room. One of my patients who was a school teacher said, I know I'm going to put Arlo, my gay brother, in the chair. He likes me. and she had a very demeaning, almost sadistic parent that she recognized was the voice of her conscience. So this is nowhere in the books on treatment of PTSD. But PTSD is a problem not because of just the 3 categories that I mentioned, but because you start to feel inside yourself that you're unworthy. You don't like yourself. You judge yourself harshly. I think a lot of the talks this morning at the level of politics and policy dealt with things in the aggregate, things we read about and think about, what's happening in America now. But let's think in the specific. There's someone in your Muslim American community that you care about. May not be politics. They may have been traumatized. They may identify with someone who does. They may have diminished themselves. They deserve better esteem. If the esteem is good, the stigma is low. If the stigma is low, the chance to rally is better. And we're all part of the human group. Last thing, and then we'll stop after this. This is a color wheel of positive emotion. Psychiatrists tend to think about depression, anxiety, paranoia, negatives. Let's think about the positives, where yellow is high energy, good stuff, jumping for joy, exhilaration. You can help yourself and one another think, when's the last time I really felt vibrant, yellow, jumping, happy? What does it take to have a little bit more? Blue is for feeling really serene, blissfully at peace. And so I asked my patient, how's your blue? I had one who burst into tears. I know that blue exists. If I let my energy go down, I get terribly depressed. She had a form of bipolar disorder. It was news to me that some people can only feel good in a high energy state. So she's dancing as fast as she can. And I've got to be very careful about giving medication that would tranquilize, because that would depress, in her particular case. But blue is wonderful. Blue is serenity. Blue is peace. We need it. Got to figure out how to find it. Different religions teach different ways to achieve that sense. Red is for love, and red actually has a hue difference because the red that's closer to yellow, I think, stands for romantic, intense, premarital, and hopefully it can keep it up in marriage. That kind, it's the love that pulls us together in exhilaration and adolescence. But then there's another kind of red that's giving and getting, and it's like fine wine, and it's like friendship, and you can count on it. There's no mystery. It's a mother-child kind of love. It's the basic foundation of all positive emotions in our species. Mother-infant bond. Well, when's the last time you felt that? When's the last time your friend felt that? Can you help raise your red? And those are the primary colors, but I don't mean that yellow has to stand for joy and blue has to stand for serenity. People have different color maps in their head. The orange isn't projecting too well, but I would say, let me go to green next. Green across the color wheel from red is for loving ourselves. And there are some people who don't think it's very smart to love yourself, or it's presumptuous, or it's prideful. Well, there's a good kind of pride. And this is where self-esteem is. I happen to think that altruism is the way to evoke green. When you do something good for someone else, you feel good about yourself, and your green is up. And part of my therapy is to try to give people opportunities to help others. We get there. I mean, I helped invent the Michigan Victim Alliance so that people who've been raped and who had their sons murdered can come to MSU and teach the law students and the medical students PTSD, and then they feel good, and their green is up. Let's let orange be for senses, for sensual pleasure, good sex, good dinner. The senses are satisfied. It's the realm of the senses. And then what's left is purple, which would be the realm of the spirit. For those who are religious, feeling God's love and loving back. For those who are not religious, it could be a walk through the rainforest or a look up at night and feeling very small but also connected to something that is timeless and vast. It's a concept, but I think it's also a feeling. And it's a feeling unlike the other feelings in our repertoire. So trauma robs us of our positive feelings. It actually diminishes our capacity, like someone with dim eyesight or failing hearing, to experience all of this. But we always have one another. And that's the message of post-traumatic therapy. You're part of a species that is outrageous. You're part of a species that is glorious. And if we can keep bringing ourselves together like we have done right now in this room, our colors are vibrant, our stress is low, and our country is healthy. Thank you. Birth trauma and believed that the path through the uterine canal during delivery caused a trauma, which then had to be dealt with in psychoanalysis. To me, that's a little bit like original sin, and I'm not a card-carrying analyst, and so I didn't exactly take to that. But of course, infants can have pain. And the fear response is important, and there can be conditioning. Let me just say this about my field, post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic therapy. We, in a way, are dealing with the opposite of psychoanalysis. The analyst assumes that there is a trauma that is unconscious. And that event that happened when you're very young causes you to be neurotic, disturbed, to have a faulty behavioral repertoire when you're older. So psychoanalysis is a search for something traumatic that is unconscious. PTSD is about something that is traumatic that is too conscious. It's the opposite. So our job as post-traumatic workers is to take the reality that is too much with us and help put it in its place. Not to deny it, but to help master the truth that occurred. So we're really dealing with some different issues, but it's great that you're raising. Yes?
Hi. I like to look at that question from the other side as a midwife who deals with a lot of refugees who have been through war trauma. I'm looking at it from the perspective of a woman with PTSD, or perhaps whose husband has PTSD, and the effects on family relationships and the development of their children and their ability to raise their children, even the actual experience of childbirth. If you could help with some of those.
Well, it's interesting. There's I don't know if I should mention, I'll mention this in public. Jim Lehrer, the NewsHour anchor, is also a novelist. And we've become friends, and I am consulting on his latest novel. He's written 21 novels, which has to do with the passing of trauma from one person in one generation to the next. So I'm actually going home and finishing this novel, and I am a psychiatrist for a fictional character. But of course, things are passed on. I don't know that it's the PTSD that gets passed on, but a traumatized mother, an inhibited mother, or an angry mother, or a self-doubting mother has some issues that you need to help her with, and everything that you can do to improve her calm, her comfort, her esteem, her ability to transmit love and a bond to that child is so important. This is the milk of human kindness that mother has. And if you help with whatever comes to you to improve her confidence, off the color wheel, her ability to feel bliss with her baby, that's very important. But it may not be the time to have her examine the source of her distress. Sometimes denial is good. Sometimes the painful task of reinterpreting why you have suffered and how you suffer can be put off to another day. Yes, that's a wonderful question, and I like having a chance to deal with the. I don't think what I'm telling you is the answer, but it's part of the approach. Yes, I think maybe we should stop here, and then I'm on time. Yes.
Regarding PTSD, when I look into stress is generally some fear of unknown.
Yeah.
So if we take and position stress out of the PTSD acronyms, and we try to deal with the definition of stress or the reality of stress or the perception of stress, don't you think that will be a good line to get a solution out of that?
Well, the question is really about stress and then PTSD. We tried to help conceptually to separate traumatic stress from stress. Hans Selye was the great psychologist, physiologist who defined the stress reaction. There were others before him. The body can experience arousal, and it's biological. Your pupils dilate, blood flows to the large muscles. There's a profound set of biological and psychological changes when we are in a state of stress, and some stresses are good, they're exciting. And we are prepared for certain kinds of action. And if we have a chance to do those actions and they succeed, then we feel very good about ourselves. Some of us seek stress so that we can function effectively in a state of stress. But traumatic stress is something else. Traumatic stress, as we've defined it here, has the capacity to kill you or to kill someone else or to turn you from a human being with passions and meaning into something that is meaningless, that's a piece of meat, at least it is to a sadistic predator, then it's hard to restrain yourself from feeling that way. So part of what I'm trying to do here is help with this clarification. Traumatic stress is not ordinary stress. Now, traumatic stress leaves something, possibly in your right temporal lobe, certainly in your pattern of responding. And you got to get over it. It doesn't do you any good. Maybe it does the rest of us good. I thought, well, the people with PTSD keep horror alive for the rest of us. Now, I'm going to say that at the U.S. Capitol to a group of veterans who are coming in for National PTSD Awareness Day. Thank you for keeping it alive for the rest of us, but what a burden. And the doctor in me admires and respects you, but also wants to help you, because you don't deserve that for the rest of your life. Folks, thanks again for having me. Please enjoy it.